guys, this is Mandy Misleds. For this tutorial I thought I'd go over drums as a few people have asked me to do that. And I'm using one of my newer projects which isn't out yet, so I'm not going to play the whole thing. But for the purpose of this I have soloed the drum group. So I'll just let you have a little bit of a listen to the drums first of all. Okay, so first of all, I thought I'd just quickly run through the kind of things that I put into my tracks with regard to drums. So obviously a kick, a snare or a clap, hats, shuffles, and then sometimes I'll add things like little tings or congas, bongos, things like that. And I do use breaks sometimes as well, but obviously taking out things that I don't want from it, or you're just using the high end. You don't need to use breaks, but I do find with one of my some of my tracks, if I'm struggling a bit to sort of give it that final polish or sparkle or a bit more energy, it can really help with that. So yeah. Now I wanted to talk about EQing as well, because I think it is really useful to EQ as you go along. And I never used to do that, and then it would get to mix down stage and it's a bit of a pain going through and EQing everything at the end. So I generally try to do it as I go along. So if I've got something like a snare, for example, here I've got two snares, and I've grouped those, and I'll come in, I'll go through grouping a little bit later. But I've taken out, as you can see here, from about 190-ish hertz. I don't need any of that low end in my snare because it's going to sound exactly the same. So I'll just show you. So you can see if I turn off the EQ and turn it back on, it sounds exactly the same. So that's kind of a good rule, because you don't really want, with the exception of your kick drum, you don't really want like the low end frequencies in there, because they will usually clash with other things that are more low end in your track. And then obviously with things like hats, now these I haven't EQ'd, but that's because they're from another project file, so they've already been EQ'd. But you'll see that if I play this one, for example, this shuffle one, you can see that there's no low end in there because I have already EQ'd that out. So that's yeah, a good strategy to use when you're going through, just having a listen and playing around with your EQ and seeing what frequencies you can take out so that it still sounds the way that you want it to sound. Also wanted to touch on mono, and I mono my kick. I think as a rule of thumb, most people say to mono things under 200 hertz. So this I've done under 155, which is, hey, maybe breaking the rules a little bit, but yeah, you don't want stereo in that low end. So that's a good rule. Now grouping as well, as you can see here, I've grouped a lot, and in Ableton 10 it's great because you can have groups within groups. I'm not sure if you can with any other DAWs, but I've put like kind of all of my high end into a group there, and then I've got my snare group, and then the kicks are just sitting there. So this is probably not organized the best that it could be, but grouping does really help with your organization, and it also helps when you go to process things as well. So if I wanted to put some saturation on those snares, I can just put it on the group instead of putting it on the individual tracks. So it does help in that way. Then I wanted to kind of go through what I do with my hats, because I feel like over the probably last few months I've sort of played around with some different techniques, and whether that's from like watching tutorials or kind of intuitively, these things have really helped to shape the sound of my drums. So I do a lot of layering. So as you can see here, I've got 4 hats. I've got those 3, then I've got a fast clicky hat, then I've got 2 shuffles, and then I've also got this glitchy percussion, which is, I don't think it's a hat, it's kind of like, I don't really know how to describe it, kind of a clicky sound, I guess. I'm going to just solo that again. So some strategies apart from layering, I guess with layering it is useful to kind of fill up the space. So I haven't so much done it in this one, but sometimes I'll have like a hat in between the other hats or a shuffle in between the others, and that kind of gives it a bit more of a groove. Another thing you can do, it's change the velocity. So I'm hoping I've actually done that here. I have, yes. So with this hat 3 layer here, to change, like to edit the velocity, and your velocity is kind of like how hard something's hitting. So if you think about when people are actually playing live drums, like they're not going to hit at the same strength each time, if that makes sense. So what I do is I'll just obviously duplicate that, and then I'm going to go down here and change the decibels, so, and have it different for each little one shot there. And I do that for like, maybe I used to do it for a lot, but I'll probably do like 8 to 16 of those and then duplicate that, and it kind of gives it like some movement. So now that's got a lot of processing on it, but you can hear it's kind of yeah, the movement comes through when you're using that velocity technique. Right, what else was I going to talk about? I did mention before, but using stems from other projects. So if you've like made, and this is also really helpful, like with that velocity thing that I mentioned before, because it can be a bit of a pain doing that all the time. So if you've created like a hat groove that you really like, bounce it out, and then you can use that in other projects, and it helps your workflow, because you're not going to be doing that all the time. And then it helps with your layering as well, because you can just go, oh, I've got a hat stem that I can use already. Another thing you can do with hats is to side chain to your kick and or your snare, and that will give it movement as well. So I don't think I've done this in, so this one here, that hat 3, this is where I've done most of the most effects processing. So this one I've side chained with my kick, and that's another thing I might mention actually. I duplicate my kick channel and then have the kick running all the way through and solo that, not solo, turn it off. Mute it, that's the word I was looking for. And then I use that for all of my side chaining. Some people convert the kick to MIDI. One of my friends told me to do that, but I'm a bit lazy, so I just duplicate it and then turn that off. And that kind of helps as well, like if you've got it running all the way through here, if you've got, like if your drums, your kick comes out and then you've got your sub running still, and it's side chained with the kick, then you're still going to have that pumping sort of effect to your sub if you've got that kick running all the way through, because it still will trigger even if it's turned off. So that's another good tip. Now I'll go through using effects on hats, and this is something that I've only like I did use effects before, like reverb. Reverb is obviously a good one to use, and it kind of gives it a bit more of a realistic feel, because if you think about in live settings, if people are playing drums, there's going to be reverb from the room around, so it is kind of trying to like emulate that effect. I hope that was the right word. So I'm going to go back to this hat 3 because I've used a bit of reverb, but I've put it really low, and I've low cut it as well because I don't want the reverb to be on the low end. Not that there is any low end really in here, but it's a kind of I just do it all the time for some reason. And then my decay I've got quite low, so there's not a lot of reverb happening. And one thing that I've been using a lot lately is delay and putting a ping pong effect on there, because it kind of gives it a little bit more stereo in your mix, and I think it sounds really cool. So with this one I don't have anything like that. That actually sounds like a break. But yeah, this one here, you'll hear that there's a lot of panning, not panning, like ping pong going on. So yeah, I think it just sounds better if you try and use things like that. And there's not really any rule of thumb, like you can try out anything. I've been using echo on Ableton a lot lately as well, not just for percussion, but for like effects and bass and stuff like that, and vocals, and it can give you some really cool effects. I think also important to mention maybe trying to play around with like the arrangement of the hats. So with this one here, I don't have the hats on a traditional kind of 4/4. So it kind of gives a bit of a different feel to the rest of them that are quite, well, that one's not really rigid, but some of them can sound a bit more rigid. Then regarding breaks, so like I said before, this can kind of give your mix or like your drums a bit more energy and a bit more sparkle. But what I generally do is, obviously I don't want the kick and the snare to come through in that break, so I've just kind of EQ'd with this first one, and EQ'd out the low end, which is sort of where I imagine my kick would be sitting, somewhere down here, but anyway, it's cut that out. And then I've sidechained with the snare, so this break snare isn't coming through, and sounds, so you can hear, oops. And then with this second break here, I've sidechained with the kick and the snare, so I'm only getting all of that sort of mid-high and percussion coming through. And let's just have a listen to this. So it's letting because I've sidechained, it's letting my kick come through and my snare, and it's not letting the kick and the snare in that break come through. So yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about. I hope that's been useful. I will quickly mention, I know a lot of people talk about tuning things and getting things in key. So if you know what key your track's in, and if you're not really familiar with music theory, you can just Google which notes are in that key, and to find out which note your drum's sitting at, you can put EQ8 on it, and we look for something called the fundamental frequency. So if we have a look here, it's the frequency that's hitting the hardest. So with this snare, I think it was around here, there. So that's, oh, I'll do it down here. So then an easy way to do it is just to drag one of these number thingies over, and then it will tell you which frequency that's at. So let's just, I reckon it's around about there. So then that's at 1.82 kilohertz. And then if you Google frequency of musical notes, I think that's what I Googled, it should come up with a page that tells you which note each frequency fits into. So that can be really helpful for if you feel like a drum isn't really sitting in the mix properly, if it sounds a bit off, you can have a listen and see what note it is and see whether that fits in with the key that your track's in. But yeah, anyway, I hope that's been helpful. I'll just quickly run through what I've spoken about again. So I spoke about obviously picking out different drums like your kick, snare, clap, hat, shuffles, little tick things, congas, bongos, EQing as you go along, monoing generally things under 200 hertz, and you can use the utility tool in Ableton for that, which is really useful. Then with your hats and shuffles, layering, side chaining to the kick and the snare. You can side chain to other things as well. Changing the velocity, using stems from other projects, using effects like delay and echo if you want to use that, and reverb, and then using breaks or certain elements of breaks. But yeah, I hope that's been helpful, and if you do have any questions, feel free to drop me a message on my Facebook or Instagram, or you can leave a comment. Please do subscribe if you like my tutorials, and let me know if there's anything you'd like me to cover. Alright, thanks guys.